Hi, I'm Adam, and welcome back to Bethesda Woodworks. Today I'm going to do my first ever tool review. So I thought, what better tool to review first than the one that I use the most, my table saw. Now, I will give a small spoiler and say, I love this table saw and I recommend it highly. And there are lots of other reviews on Sawstop table saws out there on YouTube that you can watch, but instead of just a glowing review, I'm going to tell you all the things that I love about this table saw, but I'm also going to tell you the things that I don't like about this table saw, and there are a few. This isn't my first table saw, it's actually my third. My previous table saw was a 10-inch Delta contractor saw, which had a 1 horsepower motor, and no safety features at all, and no dust collection whatsoever. Before that was a very small Black & Decker 10-inch table saw, which surprisingly, I was actually able to use to build some stuff, even though it was really underpowered, very lightweight, and rather flimsy. This is a Sawstop 1 3/4 horsepower 36-inch PCS professional cabinet saw. I only told you about my two previous table saws so you understand that this isn't my first and I have something to compare this one to. So I'll start the video by telling you the stuff that I like about the saw, and then at the end I'll tell you about the stuff that I don't like as much. There aren't as many. The first feature, the one that made me actually buy it, is the Sawstop technology inside. If you aren't familiar with Sawstop, it has a sensor that's attached to the blade that allows it to detect when you touch it within a few milliseconds. It then has this brake that it releases that slams into the blade, which stops it immediately and drops the blade below the table. I'm not brave enough to actually test the mechanism myself, and mine has never gone off. But there are plenty of videos out there where people test the blade by putting hot dogs through it. And there's also a video of the inventor of the technology putting his own finger purposefully into the blade. It stops it, it drops it below the table, and there is not even a mark on his finger. It is a remarkable technology. It is so good that I would never even think to buy another table saw that doesn't have it. The next thing that I love about this saw is just the overall fit and finish. It is an extremely well-made saw. Even if it didn't have the safety technology, the saw itself is great. The 1 3/4 horsepower motor that's in this saw is more than adequate for what I need it for. I've put 2.5-inch thick oak through it and it has not bogged down. There is a 3 horsepower option available, but I don't need that. This is the 36-inch model. There is a 52-inch model available, but I don't have room for that in my shop. Though if I did, I probably would have bought that one. The cast iron wings on this saw are great. They're flat, they're flush with the table saw itself, and I'm comparing that to my old Delta contractor saw that had stamped steel wings, which were a little bit uneven, just enough that they were able to mess up a lot of my cuts. The mechanism for raising and lowering the blade is extremely high quality and feels very solid. There is a lock here for locking the blade height in place, but I've never actually needed to use it because the blade just stays wherever I put it. Another thing that I really like about the table saw is this melamine side wing. I think there's a cast iron wing available, but I chose the melamine because, as you can see, I installed my router in it. That way I can use the fence for my table saw as my router fence. Another feature that I really like about this table saw is dust collection, which, as you know, is a problem in every shop. This one has a shroud around the blade that captures a lot of the sawdust as it comes off the blade. The shroud is then connected directly to the dust port. One thing that I absolutely love about this saw is how easy it is to install a riving knife. It literally takes just a few seconds, so there's really never an excuse for me not to use it. And a really kind of nice to have feature is onboard storage for some of the saw's accessories, like the miter gauge and the wrenches that are used to change the blades. The last feature I'll talk about that I really like is the Biesemeyer type fence. They call it a T-style fence, but I actually had a Biesemeyer fence on my old Delta saw, and this one is very similar. It's very solidly constructed, and the rails that it connects to are also extremely solid. Which leads me to the first thing about this saw that I don't so much care for. As great a saw as this is, there are a few things that I would change if I could. The first of those is the way the fence locks down. Moving the fence is fine, but when I go to lock it, it shifts just a little bit. Here's a close-up so you can see what I mean. Now that might not seem like much of a shift, and it really isn't. It's about a 1/2 millimeter or so. It's not a huge amount, but it's just enough to make my cuts off, just enough. Now fortunately I figured out a bit of a workaround. I move it close to where I need to, almost lock it, release it, and then nudge it over where I need. Now when I lock it, it doesn't move at all. Now that's the first of several minor quibbles. I did tell you that I love the saw, right? Now the next minor quibble, you may have already noticed it, is that the ruler on the right side of the blade is different than the ruler on the left. It's not because it came that way, it's because I've already had to replace this one. You can actually see exactly what I mean here. The numbers are starting to scratch off, and it was significantly worse on this side of the blade since I use this side of the blade much more often. Now this wasn't a huge deal, I just had to remove the old ruler and buy a new one for about $1 or so and put it on. Unfortunately, the new ruler wasn't actually accurate. It was actually off by at least a 32nd of an inch for each inch of length. And I didn't notice it until I had been using it for about a month and noticed all of my cuts are somehow off. But I bought a new ruler, installed it on there, and it's been fine ever since. The next minor thing that I don't really love about this table saw is the support legs for the extension wing. These are rather flimsy and they seem kind of cheaply made, especially for a saw in this price range. They're only connected to the rail by 1 bolt and the extension wing by 1 bolt. I just feel like Sawstop could have done a better job with the support legs. The next to last thing about this saw that I don't like, while not a deal breaker, is certainly something that I think Sawstop could have done a much better job on, is the miter gauge. If you notice that this one is covered with dust, that's because I never use it. This thing is junk. It moves nicely in the miter slots, and it does have adjustments in case it's a little too tight or loose. But one of the major problems is that it doesn't have positive stops. It has little screws underneath that it knocks into that stops it at certain places. But the biggest problem by far is no matter how hard you lock it down, it still moves. Come on, Sawstop. For what I paid for this saw, I would have expected it to come with a much higher quality miter gauge. I dealt with it for about 4 or 5 years until I finally broke down and bought an Incra. This is the V27, which has positive stops every 5 degrees. It also locks down extremely tightly and does not move no matter how hard I try. The best part about the V27 is that it only cost $80, and this is a huge upgrade over the stock miter gauge. And speaking of cost, that leads me to the number one thing that might turn people off from buying a Sawstop, the price. There are multiple different models to choose from a job site saw that costs $900 to a contractor saw that costs $2,000. This one, the 1 3/4 horsepower cabinet saw, costs about $2,800. There's also a 3 horsepower version for about $3,600. Now next to a house, a car, an education, and jewelry, this is probably the most expensive thing that I've ever bought. But I have never had second thoughts about buying this saw, ever. I love this saw, and I would buy it again in a heartbeat. In fact, until the Sawstop technology is available in other brands, I would never even think about buying a table saw other than a Sawstop. The good news is I think that is coming. Sawstop released their technology for other companies to use. The final thing that I will talk about is the add-ons that are available for Sawstop that I don't have. First, they have 2 different miter gauges that are upgrades over the stock. They are $250 and $450. I've played with both of them at my local woodworking club, and they are extremely high quality. And speaking of high quality, there's also an add-on cross-cut table that is available to install on the left wing. That costs about $1,400, but it is incredible. Now, I know these prices can seem a little bit daunting, especially something like the sliding crosscut table, which costs twice as much as some other table saws by themselves. But remember, you're paying for quality and security. Well, that's it for this video. If you have a Sawstop, let me know what you think of yours down in the comments below, the things that you like or don't like about it. And if you enjoyed this video, I would sincerely appreciate whatever you can do to help out a small channel like mine. Thanks very much for spending this time with me, and I hope to see you next time.